usually set in the past, at least 50 years in the past. I have two novels that I did that are written during the Holocaust, and I have some others that are a little farther up, one in the 1950s and the other one in the 1970s. And what I do is um, I interweave the present story with the past story as the backstory. Now, I've also, what I find is that it's easier to tell the story that way, because instead of, setting out to write a 500-page historical novel, you can tell the story that happened in the past relative to a mystery that's happening in the future. So did I set out to do this? Yeah, I kind of did set out to do this, because these were the stories that I wanted to tell. And the characters, or at least some of the characters, were definitely Jewish. Um, but the way that I write, and I think that Eileen and Anne will talk a little bit about this too, is that there are different kinds of writing styles, and I'm not an outliner. I'm what's known as a pantser. I have a story idea in my head, and I sit down and I start writing, and I write from the seat of my pants. That's where the term comes from. And as a result, it is organic. The story is told in an organic way. So with that, Anne, what are your thoughts on this?
Why did I write a story with Jewish characters, and did
Yes.
I start out that way? Well, I've always known that I wanted to write crime and mystery fiction, even when I was a curator, because the themes of crime and mystery, the whole idea of facing life and death, or justice and the lack of it, and so on, and just the excitement of crime and mystery, is what appealed to me. And to stick up for our genre here, some of the finest writing in American letters actually is in crime and mystery fiction, vis-a-vis, the Philip Marlowe series and James M. Cain's work and so on. If any of you are familiar with Double Indemnity and whatnot, these are masterpieces of the English language. Okay, well, having said that, as far as Jewish characters, I have an enormous historical interest in the Jewish gangsters of the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And I didn't really want to write about them, so to speak, as much as I was interested in why in the world, with all of our teachings in Torah and Talmud about law, why in the world someone would be living, a Jew would be living on the outside of the law. Putting that together with my experience as a gay person, I came up with a character, Cantor Gold, who is a very out uh, uh, lesbian art thief and smuggler in the 1950s. And the reason why she's an art thief and smuggler, as opposed to being, a legitimate curator or an art dealer, is because at that time to be gay, was against the law. So you could be, thrown in jail, or the psycho ward. Put that together with being Jewish, with our own, centuries history of oppression and being a minority that's ill treated, that allowed me to write these very exciting books. Writing crime and mystery, you have to keep it's a page turner, but it allowed me to address
Anne, you
those
froze up.
issues of what person, and to make the decision then to live outside the law. Why live outside the law? Because Cantor figures, look, if she's going to be labeled as a criminal just for her romantic preferences, essentially just for being alive, then she doesn't owe the law, Jewish law or civic law, really was just for breathing, just for holding hands with the wrong person, just for wearing the wrong article of clothing. You could be thrown in jail, what was called the mask law in New York. You could be thrown in, having none of this. She's saying, look, at the expense of losing it, rather than wait for someone to hand off her right.
Anne, we're having a little problem with your sound. Can you hear me? Okay, you know what? let's send her another link. Let's get her back in here, and we'll go to Eileen. Eileen,
Yeah.
how do you feel in terms of writing Jewish characters and themes? Was it something you set out to do, or did it happen organically for you?
Well, as you said, Alan, write what you know. And
Right.
so I went even a step further. It was to
I
write,
can't unmute. Okay.
write what you enjoy knowing, what you enjoy reading. And I had gotten into reading cozy mysteries, which are the mysteries that have everything is sort of off the page in terms of anything graphic.
Right.
Somebody once described a cozy mystery as a book you can read before going to sleep at night and still fall asleep at night. And it also just made sense to me to write a book that I could use my own experiences and my own background and have a woman rabbi in South Jersey, about 15 miles from Philadelphia, solving mysteries. And it was planned, but I'm also, Ellen, a pantser. And so a lot of what I did just sort of came as I sat down, wrote the first sentence and then the first paragraph, and then let my characters take over and write themselves into situations that I then had to figure out how to get them out of. So it's a very much a conscious decision on my part to write about Jewish characters and Jewish plots. Now, I do have to say that my short stories are very different, and I've only have a few of them, but they are much more instead of a humorous, they're a dark humor. And instead of, they're more noirish, and the characters are not necessarily Jewish. I have the one for, obviously the one that's going to be in Jewish noir. 2 is Jewish themed, surrounding the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire and modern day complications from that. And I think that may be the only, oh no, and I have another one that's an alternate history that also is Jewish. But other than that, they're, I only have a couple of them, but the others are not at all Jewish themed or
It's
Jewish
interesting you
characters.
say that. It's very interesting to say that because I also write short stories with no Jews. You know, I have this joke about I have my next book, which will come out at the end of 2021, is a collection of short stories. No Jews, no dead bodies. So it's completely a change. You know, along that line, I guess the question one would have is. How does a Jewish character affect at all writing the character? I know for me, it's more an issue of sort of the character's overall identity. You know, if I write a Jewish character, the character has has contact with Jewish culture. It may have contact with Jewish thought, Jewish philosophy. So that affects the way they think, the way they act. The same way that a lot of my characters are Dominican. And that's because I spend a lot of time in the DR, and I have a lot of very close Dominican friends. So the Dominican characters definitely reflect their culture. And I think that, you know, so it's definitely in there. It's a matter of identity. And it's interesting because, Anne, you were talking about identity. And I think that that's such a key thing when you're writing, whether you're writing a Jewish character or not. But I think that the Jewishness of a character, or the fact that a character is Jewish, does, at least for me, affect sort of the way the character moves and thinks. Anne, what are your thoughts on that?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Am I on? Okay, good. Yes, of course it does. All of my books have, at least in the Cantor Gold series, have 2 very specifically Jewish characters that are they're recurring characters. Cantor herself and another character named Esther Scheinbaum, who's known as Mom Scheinbaum. Who's actually based on a real person. If anybody knows New York crime history, there was Mar Mandelbaum, Frederica Mandelbaum, who was a fence of stolen goods early in the 20th century, or late in the 19th century, actually. And she was never caught. She was literally an empress of crime. She was never caught. She escaped to Canada before getting caught and lived on her millions for the rest of her life until her death. And mom is an elderly woman in the books. And so she's fully aware of the, she has scars from the Holocaust. She herself did not go through it. She was in America already, but of course she would have had relatives and so on. I mean, the Holocaust was part of her life experience. In the second Cantor Gold book, Tarnished Gold, it actually deals with themes of a Holocaust survivor. So in terms of your question, writing Jewish characters, if I wrote the books differently, if they didn't have Jewish characters, would it be different? You can't write a Holocaust story without having Jewish characters. You just can't. Now, understandably, there were non-Jewish victims of the Holocaust, and theoretically, you could write a book, with Gypsy, Romani characters, and of course, gay characters, and so on, and other non-Jewish characters. But it is very much a Jewish, a major Jewish theme and tragedy. So the book could not be the same. Writing a Holocaust story from outside the Jewish perspective would sort of, to my way of thinking, narrow the focus of the story of the book and sort of lessen its impact. It would be slightly less macro, enormous, and at the same time less specific, less intimate. And what I tried to do in Tarnished Gold was exactly that, the enormity of the Holocaust, bringing it down to a very specific level, in that one of the characters, Mrs. Jacobson, is the only survivor of her family of the Holocaust. And she hires Cantor, who's an art thief, to get back bit by bit pieces of her family's lost and stolen art collection that the Nazis stole. And of course, Mrs. Jacobson tried to go through the monument men, the authorities, but all of that was red tape. So she hires Cantor, who's a thief, to get the pieces back. And she has a very intimate feeling for Cantor, because Mrs. Jacobson understands what it's like to be persecuted just for who you are. Not only because Cantor is Jewish, but because Cantor is gay. Mrs. Jacobson is not, but Mrs. Jacobson recognizes that in 1952, when this book takes place, that Cantor is hated just for being who she is. And so Cantor and Mrs. Jacobson have this incredibly intimate relationship in the book. And the book could not be written as a Jewish theme, but it could not be anything else but a Jewish experience book.
Thank you.
I hope that answers your question.
That's fantastic. Eileen, weigh in.
Okay, most of my characters actually are Jewish. There are, of course, non-Jews. I mean, they live in a world where you have mixed communities, and the fictional town of Walford is very small, had been rural, is becoming more suburban, has a state university there. And so you've got a mixture of different people, and most of them, though, are Jewish. Now, one of the things that I try to do is break stereotypes. And it's very easy to fall into stereotypes when writing Jewish characters. So like one of my friends, when I put on Facebook about tonight's program, one of my friends who was a Jewish writer and actually had a book rejected by an agent saying it was too Jewish. She said, oh, it's, simple, own a dozen cardigans and has a gastroenterologist on speed dial, and a bunch of other very funny kinds of things, aversion to exercise. But what I try to do is get away from some of the stereotypes, so that, for example, my protagonist, Rabbi Aviel Cohen, is twice divorced, has no kids. And in fact, when she introduces her first ex-husband to a local Catholic priest and says, my former husband, and he's looking askance, and she says, don't worry about it. Jews are allowed not only to be married, but to even be divorced. So that that's one way of sort of breaking the stereotype. Also, she's a woman of a certain age, and people say they could hear her voice, my voice rather, when reading the book. It's in first person, and she looks pretty much like me. But I was tired of reading all of these mysteries, whether they be cozy or any genre, with these, 25-year-old, tall, skinny, physically fit. And I'm talking now about, the ones who are even in cozies who are, married. And if they're not, they are by the end of the book, and have kids and, own a bakery or a catering place or whatever. But they're always physically fit and gorgeous. And I just got tired of that. So I was trying to break that too. And it wasn't just by doing a Jewish character, just by doing something people may not expect.
That's great. That's excellent. I have a couple of quick things I'd like to talk about with both of you, which is, the first is, and I don't have any Jewish antagonists, but what would a Jewish antagonist bring to a book, do you think, to a story? Anne, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I actually have, also in Tarnished Gold, a Jewish antagonist. Cantor is a protagonist, even though she's a criminal. But there's a Jewish family that she's also dealing with, that are relatives of Mrs. Jacobson, and they're very much, especially the wife, is very much an antagonist. I mean, she's not a very good person. So what's it like to have a Jewish antagonist? Jewish people, like every other people, run the spectrum of good to evil and everything in between, fascinating and boring. We occupy the world in the same spectrum of personalities that everybody else does. So an antagonist, a bad guy, so to speak, or a bad woman, or, the antagonist, why can't they be Jewish? You can have, I think we can all say about in our Jewish families, a relative who we really can't stand. And, why not make them into an antagonist in your book? Not every Jewish person is a saint. So I just write them as the characters they are, and if they are Jewish, then that may color their personality or their view of the world, but it doesn't make them either good or bad. What makes them good or bad is their internal drive, is their penchant for being criminal or nasty or whatever it is. So writing a Jewish antagonist is pretty much the same as writing a Jewish protagonist. What you said earlier about getting into the minds and the hearts and the soul of the character and writing it from that point of view, there you are. You write, it's fun to get into the soul of, of a crumb, right, of an evil person.
I agree. I find that I don't really have any specific antagonists that are Jewish. In the Interpreter, the antagonist is a Nazi. And so there's a lot of natural tension between, the protagonist and the antagonist. But the antagonists in my Forgiving series are much less obvious, because they are murder mysteries. And you're following the detective to try to figure out through the clues who committed the crime. But what I find is that really is the key, that regardless of who I'm writing, whether it's protagonist, antagonist, Jewish, not Jewish, man, woman, what I try to write as honest of a character and as round as a character as possible, so that the reader is drawn into that character and wants to care about them. Eileen, what are your thoughts on that?
I pretty much agree with what Anna has to say. I mean, you don't really think sometimes about whether or not the antagonist is Jewish. You just write who you feel fits the role best. In my case, it seems that I never even really thought about it, but I guess most of mine have been. Not all, or sometimes the ones that are, I guess, the MacGuffin, the one who, what Hitchcock called the MacGuffin, the object that's not important in and of itself, but sets off the action. Well, in this case, the human MacGuffins, the people who may set off the situations that lead to the mysteries. Some of them are Jewish and some are not. But many of them are. And again, I just write what fits the needs of the story the best. And sometimes it just turns out to be that way, that they are Jewish, and sometimes they're not.
I have a question for you along that line. Do you think that, well, it's kind of a two-part question. What does a Jewish character bring to a mystery that a non-Jewish character wouldn't? And alternatively, what makes a book Jewish?
Who are you asking, Alan?
Eileen, let's continue with you, and then Anne,
Okay.
what about you?
How much time do we have?
Well,
I have a half-hour talk that I give on what makes a Jewish book, maybe 40
give me
minutes.
2 minutes.
What makes a Jewish book Jewish?
Give me 2 minutes.
I won't give you the whole thing. My basic conclusion in that talk is it's not just if the author is Jewish or the characters are Jewish or the plot, whatever Jewish plot may be, a Holocaust themed, let's say. It's the whole ambiance of the book. It's the Tom, what it feels like, what it seems to be, the references that are made. One of the questions that I've asked myself, and I ask actually when I give this talk, is would my books work, the basic plots of my book work, if instead of Rabbi Aviva Cohen, it was Father Jim O'Donnell, or it was somebody who owns a beauty salon. I was thinking also, somebody who works as a cash register, as a cashier at a bank or at a supermarket, but I'm not quite sure if people would be confiding in that person the way they might to a priest or any clergy person. And yeah, my plots could possibly be rewritten without a single Jewish character. I mean, obviously details would have to change, but there is still something about them that makes it feel Jewish. And it does have to do with the setting. It has to do with what's going on. My latest one, I mean, she's getting ready for Purim, obviously, the title, Kill a Megillah. Yeah. She's, and in the Yom Kippur, she's like, has to go off to Boston where her elderly mother is ill in the hospital, and it's during the Yom Noraim. I mean, how is she going to prepare for Yom Kippur, just having finished Rosh Hashanah, and not be around in the synagogue to take care of what has to be done? So those kinds of background situations very much make it a Jewish book. And in that case, some of those cases, it would just be a different book were the plot not revolving around those, not necessarily Jewish things, but around those people who are Jewish and whose lives are invested in Jewish ritual and customs.
Anne, what are your thoughts?
Well, you're right. It's a two-pronged question, and let's take let's take one question first. In that, would it be the same book if it was non-Jewish characters? Would the plots be the same? Well, I think the plot can be the same. Somebody does something, and somebody else does something as a reaction to that something. And in mystery, somebody gets killed and so you have to find the killer and all of that. So the plot could be the same. What would change would be the emotional soul of the characters, mm-hmm. and how then they go about finding the killer or unraveling the mystery or what have you. What kind of emotional look. Anytime you write a book, whether it's a mystery, anytime you have a narrative, whether it's a movie or a book or a mystery or a romance or a sci-fi or anything, it's not the story of the plot. It's not even the story of the characters and what they do. It's the story of the emotion of the characters. Yes. And that's what drives what they do. I mean, everyone here is now having an emotional reaction to what I'm saying. Now, excuse me, it doesn't necessarily have to be a wild reaction, but you're reacting to it. Excuse me again. And that reaction is dictating how you feel about what I'm saying and what else, the way you're sitting or not sitting or what have you. That's the way you write a book. That's the way you write the characters. So the plot might not change, but by having Jewish characters and non-Jewish characters, those characters, both the Jewish characters and the non-Jewish characters, react from their emotions, and their emotions are formed from their life experience, and their life experience starts with their upbringing.
Right.
So that answers one question. Now, the relationship of Jewish characters in mysteries. First of all, mystery stories deal with the law. And one of the central tenets of our Jewish teaching is the law. I mean, we capitalize the law, for crying out loud.
True.
So when I write a story about my character, Cantor Gold, who lives outside of the law by choice, she is making a Jewish decision about the law. Now, so if I wrote a mystery, which I also write mysteries with non-Jewish characters, that's a very different relationship to the law. So what makes a Jewish book then? I think it's two things. It's the characters, what's mystery or anything else. It's the characters' relationship to their feelings about the law, and their reaction, and their cultural cachet in the world, their worldview of things, which is, a Jewish person's worldview is very different from a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant's worldview. They've had very different experiences in life, very different interactions with the world. So yes, a Jewish book would reflect those interactions of Jewish characters.
Thank you.
I just thought, if I could just interject, I just thought of a scene from, I guess it's the second one, Unleavened Dead, where she has a wedding like 2 days before Pesach, and everybody has the same reaction. I don't know how many times it gets repeated when she tells somebody she's got a wedding to do that day, which is, who gets married 2 days before Pesach? And her answer is the same: a couple that's going on a honeymoon cruise on a ship that has a Pesach Seder. Well, that's the kind of thing that would never make it, in a non-Jewish book. It has to be something that shows that, the Judaism is important, but not that important. They're still going to go out on the cruise. But
that's a great point.
As you were talking, and it just kind of hit me that that's their relationship, that couple's relationship to Jewish, being Jewish.
If I can
sure
add on to that, that's a very specific Jewish, kind of reaction about going on a ship with a Seder. But it can also be broader. Jewish experience is in many ways different from, say, as we discussed, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant experience or Buddhist experience, that kind of, it's very different. But the central humanity is universal. In Tarnished Gold, Cantor goes to a funeral, and I won't tell you whose funerals because I want you to read the book, but she goes to a funeral, and it's a Jewish funeral. And she stands back from it a bit because she really shouldn't be there, but she goes to the funeral and she hears the rabbi. This is the graveside. She hears the rabbi, she hears the Jewish incantations and so on. And she hasn't heard all of these things since she was a child. She's a child of immigrants, by the way, which is, another theme in the book. Anyway, so she hears these, these Jewish religious activities going on. She hears the liturgy, and it comes towards her almost like a wraith. And it brings her back into herself and her upbringing and her family and what her immigrant parents went through and so on to become Americans and what have you. And that kind of experience in Cantor's case is specifically Jewish, but for any immigrant child, it's universal, of bringing one back to one's very most basic roots and what that means to transcend those roots if you can. And she finds, of course, that you can't.
It's very interesting you say that, because that is one of the main thrusts of my work, which is the subject of immigration and the commonalities between Jewish immigration and other immigration. In particular, the Jewish experience coming here both at the turn of the 20th century and then during the period, the period just before Hitler. and the Latino immigrant experience. And I speak about this very, very often when I talk about The Interpreter. So in terms of these two issues, I just want to make two quick comments. First of all, is that I often talk about how the character of Kurt Berlin in The Interpreter, he is sent out of Vienna on a Kindertransport at the age of 17. And his mother stands with steely resolve, and his father with steely resolve on the platform, and they keep their calm. They don't cry. They smile. They watch this child. This mother watches her child, who she has put alone on this train. The train disappears into the distance, and she knows that she may never see this child again. And the point that I often make when talking about The Interpreter is that this is the same emotion that a mother in Central America has when she takes 100 single American dollar bills that are filthy, that she's collected over 20 years, and sticks it into the pocket of her child, daughter or son, and says, walk to the border of America, get there, and bring me later. She knows she may never see that child again. So there is a commonality. And there is this immigrant experience that it's different, but it's the same. And what's interesting with The Interpreter is I had a very hard time finding a publisher. I had published a couple books with a small publisher, and I was looking for someone new. Make a long story short, at one point, I considered because I kept hearing that too many Holocaust books. We don't want any more Holocaust books. So I was thinking about taking the whole story and moving it to closer to the present, where the Kurt Berlin character would be a young Kurdish or Yazidi man who had escaped from ISIS, but had to go back in search of this, his girlfriend that he had to leave there, and that he was working for the American army. So I could have moved the whole thing, but what's interesting is the story itself could have been translated and transformed into a story about people in the Middle East, in the last 10 years, but it would have not have had the same sort of Jewish feeling that it has. So yeah, I think that there is there's a difference between the two, but there's also a commonality that's important. Connie, do we have a hard end at 8:30, or can we run a little over? Oh, what did you just do? Connie, unmute.
I said, I don't think that we'll get cut off as long as I don't end the program.
Okay, so what I want to do is I want to move along.
I'm wrong, I apologize.
Oh, well, we're going to take our chances. I want to talk a little bit about sort of our individual writing experiences and sort of, where we're coming from and what we do in terms of mystery and noir. I'm going to speak a little bit about myself first, and then we'll go to Anne and then to Eileen. So I write murder mysteries, but they're usually wrapped in a historical novel. Someone once described my work as a history wrapped in a mystery wrapped in a love story. So for me, it's got all the components that I would want to read in a book. Clearly my Jewish identity affected my writing, and my need to tell the stories of the people that I knew, mostly my family members who had escaped from Europe during the Holocaust, was very important to me to bring these stories to the public, to the reading public. And really what happened was, with my first novel, Forgiving Maximo Rothman, I had this story from my uncle, Max, who had escaped from Europe and gone to, he had gone to the Dominican Republic, to a place called Sosua. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but 854 Jewish refugees escaped to Sosua. It was established through the Avion Conference. The Dominican Republic had agreed to take up to 100,000 Jewish refugees over 10 years, and only 854 actually arrived in Sosua before the December of 1941, which is when the Americans entered the war. And I had his story, and then I was doing research. And as I was doing this research and speaking to other people who had been in Sosua and whose parents had been in Sosua, I came to understand that the 854 Jewish refugees miserably waiting in the Dominican Republic with their wool clothing to go to New York when the war was over would not carry a novel. So what I did was I constructed a murder mystery around this. I started in the present, and I killed off the survivor. And the question was, how did he die? I had to leave the clues. I had to follow the clues. And, I don't want to tell you too much, because I hope you might buy the book and read it. So, but the answer is that For me, I really write in sort of a cross genre because I like to use a backstory and I like to use a present story, but in a very short period of time. Most of my work, the main story happens in a 2 to 3 week period. In the Interpreter, it was a little longer. It was 3 months. And then I like to flash back and give information to the reader. So it's a hybrid kind of form. And for me, as I was explaining, it's very integral to the story that the story itself be Jewish. And before I pass this off to Anne, I will tell you that when I published Maxwell Rothman, I had my first event, which was at my synagogue, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, which is on the west side of Manhattan. Someone in the audience asked me if I was going to continue to write Jewish books. And I said, of course I'm going to continue to write Jewish books. First of all, that's what I know. But more importantly, Jewish people buy 23% of all new fiction published every year. So we have a market. Why would we write it? With that, I'd like to pass over to Anne. I'd like you, if you would, talk a little bit about the idea of Jewish justice and how it fits into your work and your characters.
Well, as I said earlier, Cantor has to make a decision in her life about justice, and that she's not going to get any because of who she is. She insists on she will not live in the closet. And in the 1950s, that was very dangerous. So her relationship to the law is very different than her relationship to justice. She believes in justice, but she will choose to live outside the law because the law will not give her justice. She believes in justice as an innate part of her being, which is very much part of Jewish soul. And she does live there. But law is law can sometimes be the enemy for her, whereas justice is not. And this is one of the reasons why I choose to write crime and mystery fiction, especially when it does come from a Jewish point of view, in that I can address issues of the law of justice or the lack of it. Who does the law treat well? Who does the law oppress? Which is, of course, is very timely even now. And yet I can, writing crime and mystery fiction, especially from the point of view of the criminal, allows me to talk about these things without being preachy. I can get you to turn pages and say, ooh, what happens next? Who done it? What's going on? Oh my God, Cantor, get out of there. You're going to get killed. And all of this. And to top it all off, she is very, very sexy. She really is sexy.
She is.
So I want you to turn those pages. I want you to get involved in the mystery, in the whodunit, in the what's going on here, in the why are these people doing it. I want you to enjoy yourself. And it allows me to talk about issues, very much Jewish issues, without being religious about it, without being preachy about it, but addressing those issues in a tight, noirish, sexy writing style.
And before I go to Eileen, I want to ask you one more question, which is, could you just give us a couple minutes on noir? Talk a little bit about noir, and because I love it, and some of my work falls into it too. But please talk to us a little bit about noir and why it's so special.
Okay. Noir really comes from film noir, which reached its peak in the 1950s. It's a post-World War II. People think of it as before the war, but it isn't. It's a post-World War II art form, because, as many of you may remember, post-World War II was a time of American expansion. It was almost full employment, the growth of the suburbs. It was a golden time for many people in many ways. But film noir grew out of, and literary noir grew out of the idea that when the guys came home from the war, they recognized two things, that people could really be cruel to each other. I mean, not only in war itself, but when they opened up the camps, they really saw the highest cruelty that human beings can inflict on each other. And when they brought this new worldview home, they lost their innocence in World War II. That they recognize that, yeah, the world is very corrupt, and even, full employment, golden United States, and in the case of my books, golden New York, right underneath that layer of golden prosperity was a very corrupt world. So that is where noir comes from. Now, there is in literature a classic definition of noir, which gets moved around quite a bit. People sometimes confused hard-boiled with noir.
True.
Hard-boiled can be where the hero or the heroine, the protagonist is a tough guy or tough dame or whatever, the femme fatale and all of that. But it all comes out right in the end. And the Raymond Chandler work, Philip Marlowe's, which you see with, the Humphrey Bogart pictures, it all comes out right in the end. True noir can be very hard-boiled or not, but true noir, the ending is not all right at the end. You're screwed.
Right.
That's it. You're screwed. Your life is going to screw you. And so, but now people tend to use noir just to mean the darker literature, hard-boiled literature. So it's not as, the definition is not as straightforward, you're screwed, as it once was. But that is the classic definition of noir. Which makes Alfred Hitchcock in many ways noir. Of course, Vertigo being the prime example. Poor Jimmy.
Oh, we're losing you again.
James Stewart, the love of his life, gets killed twice.
Right.
Screwed.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Eileen. It's kind of a similar question.
Alan,
So
you're
I want to.
breaking-
I'm sorry, Ann. I thought you were done. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I know it's breaking up here, but yeah, I'm done.
Okay. All right. Eileen, I want to. I hate Zoom because this is what happens. I want to ask you kind of a similar question because you write cozies, which are probably the most popular of all the subgenres. So I want a few things. Your titles reflect the Jewish year and the celebrations and observances. How did you come up with the idea of using them as the basis for your series? And how, in terms of writing a series, how do you keep it fresh? What do you do with the plot to one versus the next one? Are they connected? Could you speak a little bit about a little bit more about cozies and about writing a series versus standalones? I know it's a lot, but I know you can take it.
A lot of times people confuse, as they do between hard-boiled and noir, they confuse cozies and traditional. And they have a lot of things in common. The sex, the violence, anything graphic is off the page. They tend to use more humor, they're lighter. But in a traditional, is one major difference from what we get in a cozy. And I use the example of Agatha Christie. She writes both. Her Poirot stories are traditional because he is a professional sleuth.
Okay.
Cozy's Miss Marple in amateur. And that's the major difference between a traditional and a cozy. They also, both of them will concentrate a lot on backstory. I've seen the rules they talk about for writing mysteries. It's got to be the murder has to occur within the first page. I have read best-selling cozies, some of which have no murder, and some of them, the murder shows up like on page 100. A lot of backstory, a lot of character development. And some people find that slower moving. They don't want that. They want the page turning, what's going to happen next. So that when I've had people say to me, I couldn't wait to get through it because it was so gripping. Going, what? I think that partially is because I knew it was going to happen. But I don't write it to be that kind of a page turner because you want to find out what's going to happen. Are they going to get out of this incredibly dangerous situation? It's more of what's going to happen next to these characters. How are they going to relate to each other? How is it going to develop? What is the mystery going to be? And some of what I do isn't as much a whodunit. You may already have a pretty good idea of who the bad guy is partway through the book, but it's a why done it. What is the motivation? Why did they possibly do this? Why does this seemingly normal type elderly woman turn out to be this, criminal mastermind? but it's a different kind of process. As I said earlier, I am a pantser. I sometimes have no idea what's going to happen. My characters will put themselves in these impossible situations, at which point I get in the shower and try to figure out. My best thinking comes in showers.
That's great.
Then I have to remember what I came up with. It's worse than writing it before you fall asleep at night. But the whole process of it, I want to get back for a second to what you were saying about justice before. Thinking about that, I realized that in each of my books, including the fourth one, it's events from the past that catch up with people in the present, and justice is served. As for writing series, it's a real juggling act. How do you keep it fresh for those who have read the previous books and not bore them while explaining enough of the backstory for new readers? Now, mine do not have to be read in order, but it's preferable because there is character development. First of all, they do not take place like a month or two before the previous one. That's when you get into that what they call a Cabot Cove syndrome of who would want to live in that town where everybody comes up dead, or who would be famous with this woman because everybody she meets dies. These take place 2.5 years later, each one, and things have happened. And they've developed and they've changed and relationships have changed. So I try to weave that in to the books to show things happening and bringing sometimes characters who are secondary background characters in the earlier books, maybe coming forward and being a major character in the next book. And I do that deliberately to try to keep it fresh. It also helps that by doing that, I also already have a fully thought out character to come in as a forefront character for the following book. But it can be a real juggling act trying to not bore your previous readers, but make it clear for the new ones.
If I can.
Sure, please, Anne.
Jump on that with a sentence. Because the Kendrick Gold books are a series, and there's 4 out now, and a 5th one is coming out in July, and I've just contracted for a 6th and all of that. And I don't really think in terms of keeping it fresh or not fresh, because to me, the whole arc of the thing, it's a saga. It's this ongoing saga of her life and crimes. The books, again, each one of them can be read as a standalone, or you can go through the whole saga as a series. But for me, I guess I approach it as a saga of this ongoing life and what she encounters in her life, and the recurring characters, Mom Scheinbaum and Sig L'Oreal, and the other people.
The one piece of mine that is part of this saga and goes on and develops, and it went in a direction I never planned. And that is what's happening between her and this first ex-husband who comes into town as supposed to be an interim. He's a college professor of criminal justice, and he's called in as a consultant, and the police chief dies, and he's appointed as a temporary position until they can to do their search for a new one, and winds up being a temporary position for like 4 years or 6 years or something like that. And I never wanted them to have an ongoing relationship. This was my way of making sure that she, as an amateur sleuth, had an entree to the police department, what was happening, because you need that in cozies. But then my readers kept saying, when's the next book coming out? I want to see what's going to happen with Aviva and Steve. And I'm going, I have no idea. Because I wasn't planning on anything happening with them. And I had to actually switch my ideas of what was going on. And I'm still, to be quite honest, it's coming on now, the 4th book, and I keep going back and forth what's happening with it. I pretty much know what's going to happen with it. But in that way, you almost do need to read them in order just to see the changes in what's going on between the two of them. And I do bring in, as I said, characters from previous books.
Right.
I bring them forward to be more focused on in the later books.
It's interesting you say that because I have a very similar situation with the Forgiving series. When I wrote Forgiving Maxwell Rothman, I wrote a standalone. And then I would start going to places to speak about it, and readers would say to me, "Oh, you left so many loose ends. Are you going to write more books?" And ultimately, I wrote 2 more. And I agree with both of you. And you're right. It's a saga. And I was kidding around the other day, and I took a picture of the 3 books together because I just got the republished of the first 2, and I published the 3rd book, and I took a picture and I sent it to my son, and I said, 1,019 pages. It's my War and Peace. So yes, I mean, in effect, what we are really writing are sagas. They're just broken up because there's not a publisher in the world who would publish a 1,000-page book anymore.
Right.
With
And I
that
don't
said,
always
Unless you're George
know
R. R.
what-
Martin, then you have no problems getting it done.
exactly.
I don't always know what's going to happen to her years in advance. I find out as I write the books.
Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement on that. I would like to give an opportunity to our audience if they have a couple of questions before we talk about where you can get our stuff and how you can help us. Does anybody have, by show of hands, does anybody have a question? Jeanette, yes, please unmute.
Yourself.
Yeah, a quick question.
Sure.
My husband and I were watching a Miss Marple movie last night, and one of his complaints is, you should, the reader or person watching should have some clue as to, what are the facts unfolding here, so that you have some reasonable understanding about why the murder was committed and who did it. But it seems like sometimes these are pulled out of thin air. So I guess the question I would have for any of the panel is, what are your thoughts about that? Is that unfair to the viewer or the reader to throw in these explanations that no one could follow at the last minute?
Right, absolutely.
I take that first, please.
I absolutely agree with you. It is not fair to the reader to suddenly, have Poirot pull everybody into Agatha Christie makes it work. Pull everybody into a drawing room and talk to them and say, but you see, you are not who you say you were. Now, yes, that happens in mine, but it happens gradually. It's not this sudden thing. It's like being in a professor's office and looking at her diploma and saying, oh, that's interesting. She has a different last name in her diploma. Wonder if she was married before. That kind of thing gives you a little hint, or saying, I took a look at this video, and it's first person, so I'm saying, I took a look at this video and realized how much this woman looks like the other one, or, oh, wait a minute, I've seen those earrings before. Wasn't the other woman wearing them? Little things like that she will mention and notice. And so I try very hard not to just dump all the solution at one time. It has to happen at some point, where somebody's going to explain exactly what was going on. But it has to be something that when you hear the explanation, you read the explanation, because, oh, of course, why didn't I notice that before? I should have realized that's what was going on. So that's something. The other thing too, and this is one of my friends said to me when he found out when I was writing my first one, he said, do me a favor, don't leave any red herrings dangling. Explain. Make sure it's understood why you introduced such and such a factor and then never came back to it again. Come back to it and explain it, and which is something that I try very hard to do. When I reread, I go through and looking sometimes specifically, oh, wait a minute, I mentioned those earrings before. I better do something with that. And a lot of times it can be a little thing like that, which seems to be a red herring, which either gets explained in a way that shows it was irrelevant, or in such a way that people say, oh, why didn't I pick that up before? So yeah, that's a very good point that you made, Jeanette.
Thanks.
Yeah, that is a good point. What I do, first of all, never cheat the reader. Just never cheat the reader.
Exactly.
When you get to the reveal of who the killer is, if that's what the story is about, on the one hand, the reader should say, oh my God, I never saw that coming. However, you have to make the solution believable.
Mhm.
So even though they may not have seen it coming, they say, but they did see it coming. Somewhere in the back of their minds, they remember that, yes, this person, would be the killer. So you never cheat the reader. But as writers, we have a bag of tricks up our sleeves. And what, the greatest element in a mystery writer's bag of tricks is misdirection. It's like a magician, I'm pulling the rabbit out of the hat over here, but I'm having you look over there. But I have to, by the end of the book, I have to marry what's happening over here and what I misdirected you over there so that you believe the result. But being a writer in many ways is like any other profession. You have to have your technique. You have to be able to, like a musician, play the scales. And one of the
Mhm.
notes of the scale is misdirection. I want you to look over here while what's going on over there. But once I show you what's going on over there, you also have the aha moment.
Exactly. Do we have another question?
I just I'm just trying to pull it up here. I had a
Oh, yes,
same
somebody,
quote.
Oh, someone put something in the chat?
yes,
Oh,
Susan
there-
has her hand
Susan
up.
has a question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a question that has nothing to do about what we're talking about. And that question is, well, it does have a little bit. I have a 2-book deal with a publisher, and it took forever, and it's taking forever for the publisher, who is kind and wonderful and very, very slow. How
think I
did
know
you
her.
find, pardon me?
I think I know her.
It was because of the kindness of someone on the panel, Eileen Schneider, that I was able to find this publisher. But how do you find a publisher of Jewish books? It's terribly difficult.
I
Okay.
think to answer your
Basically, you
question,
don't.
Well, you guys go first, and then I'm going to respond a little bit. Anne, you start. Eileen, then I'll talk.
okay, I think I first of all, I don't know why your publisher is being so slow. So I don't know the ins and outs of all of that. In a contract, it should stipulate that upon receipt of the manuscript that it will be published in this and such a time. They should give you a drop date, a publishing date.
Mhm.
Okay. But having said that, finding a Jewish publisher, it's not so much, I find that it's not, I ran into the same thing. Well, where do you find, books for gay people and blah, 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 and it's not only gay people who read my books. I have a readership of all kinds of people, non-Jewish straight people, read my books, even though there's this gay Jewish protagonist. I think I hate to say it, but a good book, a story that grabs that acquiring editor by the throat will get published. If it doesn't, whether it's Jewish or Buddhist or gay or straight or, jumping off a bridge or whatever it is, if it doesn't grab that reader, the acquiring editor by the throat, then it might get passed over. You have to start with a damn good book. Now, what makes a damn good book is going to be, subjective. One editor thinks it's brilliant, and somebody else thinks it's a piece of trash. That's where just plain luck comes in. You got to find the right editor who tunes into you. And that's the only piece of advice I can give you. But if your publisher's being slow, you have to find out why.
Eileen, please.
The pandemic is slowing everything down. None of my publishers, and I've had 3 different ones, has been Jewish. They don't do Jewish books, and they have not been Jewish themselves. If you want a book to have wide appeal, you don't want to just go through the Jewish publishers. To me, the ultimate validation that my books were crossovers was when the couple of awards I've gotten for them have all been from non-Jewish sources. Also, the David Award, as you did, Alan, from Deadly Ink, and Roberta certainly is Jewish, but she doesn't give the award. And the other was from the Public Safety Writers PSWA Association, which is made up mostly of current and retired first responders, CIA agents, FBI agents, police chiefs, fire. It is one of the, I think, maybe two of us in the organization, two others are Jewish, besides myself, that's it. And when they gave me the award, that really floored me, because I didn't think they would get it, especially since many of them are also from rural areas, including the woman who was in charge of the committee that gave out the awards. But so you really want to be with whatever publisher is going to fit you the best and your needs best and can help you. If there's something in your books that is not going to be understandable by a non-Jewish audience, they can help you with that. You know, you really, I don't think the ethnic background of the publisher necessarily makes a difference, unless you're going for a specific niche audience, in which case you'll want one who will do the distribution and the publicity and such to a specific group.
Mhm.
But
would
generally
like to
speaking,
add-
the publishers don't do that anyway. It's up to us to do our own PR. Even if you're with one of the big five, you still have to do your own PR unless you don't need it. You know, J.K. Rowling doesn't need the PR, but she gets it because she makes the money.
I just want to quickly add that my first publisher only publishes books, novels with Jewish themes. And I was very happy for all the help he gave me, but he had no idea sort of really how to be a publisher. It was a part-time job for him.
Mhm.
But the new publisher, who has published my last two books and republished my first two books, she is not Jewish. It is not a Jewish publisher, and she loved the story despite the fact that it was a story with heavily Jewish themes. In the first book she published with me was The Interpreter, which is a very serious, it's a thriller. It's not a murder mystery, and it's set, right after World War II, and it's very, very Jewish, and it really deals with the Jewish experience. So again, I think that Anne and Eileen are really right that you have to find someone who loves your work.
Yeah.
And if they love your work, I know it sounds ridiculous because every time an agent said to me, I didn't really love it. I was like, you don't have to love it. You just have to sell it. But no, they have to love it to sell it. So you have to find the right person. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Take your time. And yes, if you have a contract, there should be a date in there and you have to hold them to the date. If there's a problem, let them give you a new date. But it can't be a forever relationship where it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. It has to actually happen.
Okay.
In my case, it's my publisher has been more than patient with me because I'm about 2 years behind schedule of when I should have had my latest book into him.
Yeah.
Can I just intercede something here from the earlier question about cheating the readers? This is a quote from David Gerald, who is probably best known. I mean, he's a major science fiction writer, but he's best known for having created the tribbles in Star Trek. He said, "The audience will bring a willingness to suspend disbelief. They will not suspend common sense." And
That's
I mean, I've saved that.
No, it's very interesting.
If I
So
could-
true. And it's like what I try to remember whenever I'm writing and I want to get off on some kind of wild tangent. Don't do it unless it's organic to the story and moves it forward.
I'd like to give you both an opportunity and then I'll finish up. Where can we find your books, Eileen?
Okay, and I'm on Amazon, on Kindle. If you put into probably the easiest way to get hold of them is to put in Rabbi Eileen Schneider into the search on Amazon. And when my current publisher also bought my previous ones and reissued them, we decided to put them with similar covers. So there were all these yellow covers that each one has a different symbol from depending which holiday is in the title. And that way I could sort of wrap them up in crime scene tape and sell them at conferences as a box and bundled set. They're there, or on my website has links for purchasing, which includes Kindle and the publisher himself. My website is
You know,
Rabbi,
I can send
word.
everybody your website. I've got
Perfect.
all of your websites and your links, from when we did the marketing for the event. So I can
Nice.
send it to all the attendees.
Thank
So,
you. Okay.
Excellent. And
Kindle, basically.
okay.
And some
And-
independent bookstores may have them. It varies. They've been out for a while.
And Anne, where can we find you?
Well, also Amazon, obviously, just type in my name and my page will come up. And the same way with Barnes and Noble and Smash, whoever you order your books from. I also, right from your local bookstore, there are bookstores that right now a lot of them are closed, but you can order them from, all the major bookstores across the country. The usual places, my books are distributed through a major distributor, so you can get them pretty much anywhere. Just, you just Google me and there I am.
Same for me. You kind of Google me or go to my website or go to Amazon or go to Smashwords or Barnes and Noble, all the regular places. And I will say this on behalf of all of us. What you can do to help us is buy our books, read our books, recommend our books to your friends and family, and never lend them to anyone.
Right.
Okay.
I
Don't
just
cheat the
put that
author
on
out of
Facebook.
another royalty. Okay.
Very
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Eileen, and thank you to the
Pleasure.
audience. And I can't think this was a lot of fun, and I hope we'll have a chance to do it again. Thank you, Connie. And do you have anything to wrap up before we leave?
Yeah, I would just like to say this was just wonderful. I don't know if you guys can see this, probably can't, but I wrote all these notes because the themes that everybody brought up, Anne with it being so open and honest about, her personal journey and how she chose to deal with being an outsider and matching it up with Jewish gangsters, which is just brilliant. And then Eileen talking about, what makes it Jewish. Well, it's the whole feeling and how that animates things. And of course, Alan, with your your chosen genre with the mystery and the Jewish and the Holocaust, and of course the romance at the end. Or maybe at the beginning too, but at any rate, no, it was wonderful. And I hope that we can do this again sometime, maybe post pandemic, right? Wouldn't that be wonderful?
That would be lovely.
We would love to
I
come
would
up
love
with
to
In
go
person
to
at the JCC.
somewhere. This is
right?
great.
In person again would be the
In
best.
person
Oh,
would be great. And
can't
luckily,
wait.
all of you are pretty local. And again, I want to thank our guests who came from California and Illinois and Pennsylvania. It's just terrific. And of course, Westchester County, Rhonda. But thank you so much. And just be on the lookout. I know you got to see, where we were presenting tonight by looking at our JCC website, and check out our arts and culture page there, also on our Facebook page. And we have a lot of good things coming up. In terms of books, we have on February 16th, for those of you who like to cook, we have a cooking demonstration with Ronnie Fine, who is a Jewish cookbook writer, and the book is Modern Kosher Kitchen. And we also have, in celebration of Black History Month, we're having one of our film festival, Film Shared Legacies, which is in partnership with AJC. And so all of this is on the website, so you don't have to remember anything. You just click on stanfordjcc.org or go to Facebook. So thank you again so much, much appreciated. I will find out the answer on the question about how people get if they're charged when they click on the archive of the recording. I'll let you know about that. But thank you all so much, and thank you, our guests.
And
Thank you all for being
Thank
here.
for you all
this evening, and
tomorrow.
Thank you for inviting
Okay.
us, Connie. And
You're
Al.
most welcome.
Eileen, Ann,
Happy to have you.
I'll touch base with you tomorrow. Take care. Thanks, everyone. It was
Good
great.
night, everyone.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much for the audience. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.